She mailed me a bill for loving her son. 4 months after the divorce was final, a certified envelope landed on my kitchen counter, and inside it was a number that was supposed to break me. Before this story goes any further, take 1 second and hit subscribe, because stories like this remind us that the quietest people in the room are often the ones keeping score the whole time. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 35 years old. I balance other people's books for a living, and for 7 years, without ever meaning to, I was quietly balancing my own family's books too. I just didn't know I'd one day have to show my work. Let me take you back to the morning it started. The envelope came certified, which meant someone had paid extra money just to make sure I signed my name to my own humiliation. I remember standing at the counter, coffee going cold beside me, breaking the seal with my thumb because I didn't have a letter opener close enough. Inside was an invoice. A real one. Typed. Formatted. A logo at the top that made it look almost official, almost legal. Balance due, $78,000. Line item, wedding expenses, rendered in full. Due in 30 days. And at the bottom, in tight, deliberate handwriting I would have recognized anywhere, 7 words that told me everything about the family I used to belong to. Family always pays what it owes. I read it once and let out a laugh that had nothing funny behind it. I read it a second time, and that's when the bookkeeper in me noticed the details, an invoice number, a due date, line items dressed up to look like something a court would take seriously. I read it a third time, and I noticed my own hand. It was shaking. Not because of the number. I want to be honest with you about that from the very beginning. $80,000 is a serious sum, but I've spent my whole career staring at serious numbers without flinching. What shook me was smaller, and so much worse. My former mother-in-law, Doreen, had taken 7 years of my life, 7 years of holidays, hospital waiting rooms, quiet transfers I never once mentioned to anyone, and folded all of it down into a single line that read balance due. She had turned my marriage into an invoice. I hadn't even set the paper down when my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost didn't look, because some small animal part of me already knew the day wasn't finished with me yet. It was a text from Paige, my ex-husband's younger sister. You know exactly what you owe us. Not can we talk. Not I think there's a misunderstanding. You know what you owe. Like it was already a fact, decided in a room I hadn't been invited into. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't one grieving, bitter woman acting alone in a moment of anger. This was a plan. A family had sat around a table somewhere and built a story, and in that story, I was the villain. You have to understand what a town like Ashford Falls does to a woman's name before you understand why a fake invoice could genuinely frighten me. It's small. 1 good grocery store. 2 churches that don't speak to each other. A memory that never, ever lets anything go. In a place like that, your reputation isn't a soft, forgiving thing. It's currency. It's the difference between a fair price at the mechanic and a suspicious once-over. It's the difference between a warm welcome at the church potluck and a table nobody quite invites you to. I had spent a decade building mine, one careful invoice at a time. So when I walked into the grocery store 3 days later, I felt the shift before I understood it. 2 women I'd known for years were standing near the produce. When they saw me, their conversation didn't just pause, it stopped, half a second too fast. The way conversations only stop when they were about you. One of them smiled at me the way you smile at a stranger you've already decided something about. I picked up my bread and my milk, and on my way out, I heard it. Quiet. Not quite quiet enough. Cleaned that whole family out and left poor Ethan with nothing. That was the story now. That was the woman walking around town wearing my face. And here's the cruelest thing about being talked about behind your back, you cannot fight fog. There's no meeting to attend. No form to file an objection with. Someone hands you a role you never auditioned for, and the whole town starts treating you as if you've already played the part perfectly. I sat in my car in that parking lot with the groceries still in my lap, and I understood something with total clarity. Doreen hadn't sent me a bill. She had sent me a verdict, and mailed copies of it to the entire town. To understand how I got here, you need to understand who I was before any of this happened. I grew up 30 miles outside Ashford Falls, in a small house where the heat got turned down in November and stayed down until spring. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. My father wasn't around long enough to leave much of an impression at all. I learned early that numbers don't lie to you. People do. So somewhere around the age of 10, I decided I'd rather trust the numbers. I put myself through community college. Then a bookkeeping certification. Then years of slow, patient work, building a client list one small business at a time. By 24, I had saved enough to buy a small two-bedroom house on Larkspur Lane, with my name, and only my name, on the deed. I was prouder of that house than almost anything else I'd ever done. It was proof that a careful woman could build something nobody could take from her. What I didn't understand back then was that my greatest strength had a shadow hiding behind it. I fixed things quietly. When a client's books were a mess, I stayed late and made them right and never mentioned the hours. When someone I loved was drowning, I reached for my checkbook before they'd even finished the sentence. And I kept receipts the way other people keep grudges, filed, dated, organized, but I never once showed them to a soul. I told myself that was grace. That real generosity doesn't keep score. I believe that a lot less now. Because in the bottom drawer of my desk, there was a green folder. And for 7 years, it had been quietly filling up with the true cost of loving people who never once planned on paying me back. I just hadn't opened it yet. Now let me tell you about Doreen, because a villain you don't understand is only a cartoon, and Doreen was never a cartoon. She grew up on a farm that was always one bad season from failing, and she married into another one just like it. She and her husband, Walter, held that land together through droughts and collapsing markets, and Doreen learned to guard every dollar like it was scripture. I respected that once. Some part of me still does. But hardship does strange arithmetic to a person. Somewhere in those lean years, Doreen stopped believing that anything given freely could simply be a gift. In her mind, every dollar she ever spent on her children was a loan, quietly accruing interest, waiting to be called in. Nothing in this family is free, she used to say, smiling like it was wisdom and not a warning. When Ethan and I got engaged, Doreen offered to pay for the wedding. I was young. I thought it was kindness. I understand now that it was an investment. At my own rehearsal dinner, glass in hand, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear her. You married up, Claire. The least you can do is settle up. I laughed, because I thought she was joking, because everyone around us was laughing too. She wasn't joking. She was reading me the terms of a contract I never signed. People love to believe a marriage ends because of one enormous, dramatic thing. Mine ended over 1,000 small ones, and almost every single one of them had a dollar sign attached. Ethan wasn't a monster. I want to be fair to him, even now. He was gentle and funny, and completely unable to sit still in the same room as a problem. When his truck loan went underwater in our second year, I paid it off. $17,600. I told myself that's simply what partners do for each other. When he got behind the wheel after one drink too many in year 3, I hired the lawyer and covered the fines, because the alternative was watching him lose his license and his job in a town that would remember both forever. When his mother's roof failed during a brutal January storm, I wrote that check too, because she was family, and family doesn't let a widow sit under a leaking roof. Back taxes he'd hidden from me. A food truck business he was certain would change our lives, abandoned in a rented lot within the year. Every single time I reached for my checkbook, I quietly logged it. Not because I ever planned to collect. I need you to hear that clearly. I never once thought of any of it as a loan. I thought of it as the ordinary arithmetic of building a life with someone. But some old instinct in me, the one from the cold house and the 2 jobs, made me keep a record anyway. The date. The amount. The reason. Bank confirmations and cleared checks, folded quietly into that green folder and then forgotten. I couldn't have told you why I did it. I only knew that a woman who grew up watching numbers save her, never once throws a receipt away. It turns out the habit I was almost ashamed of was the only thing that would eventually save me. I didn't leave Ethan in a blaze of fire. There was no screaming match, no thrown ring, nothing cinematic for the town to chew on. What happened instead was quieter, and honestly, sadder. I woke up one ordinary morning and realized I had been the only adult in my own marriage for years, and that I was tired in a way sleep could no longer fix. The final straw wasn't dramatic either. It was a joint account. Ethan had let his mother talk him into quietly moving money out of our shared savings to cover one of the farm's expenses, without telling me first. When I found out, he didn't even understand why it was a problem. She needed it, he said, like that single sentence settled the entire matter. Like our savings account had simply been Doreen's emergency fund with a delay built into it. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did what I always do when the ground shifts under me. I got organized. I met with a lawyer. I filed cleanly, fairly, asking for nothing that wasn't already mine. I kept my house on Larkspur Lane, because it had always, only, been mine. I didn't touch the farm. I didn't ask Ethan for a single dollar of what I'd quietly poured into that family over the years. I just wanted to leave with my dignity intact. The judge signed the papers on a gray Tuesday in March. I drove home to my quiet little house and thought, that's the end of it. I believed the divorce was a door closing softly behind me. Doreen believed it was the day her invoice finally came due. 4 months later, a certified envelope proved which one of us had actually understood the situation. The morning after it arrived, I called Renee Castillo, the attorney who had handled my divorce. I read her the whole thing, line item by line item, and there was a pause on the other end of the phone. And then she laughed. Which is not usually what you want from a lawyer. Claire, she said. This isn't an invoice. It's a piece of paper with delusions of grandeur. She walked me through it plainly. Money earned during a marriage is marital property, with very few exceptions. One spouse cannot simply invoice the other, years later, for a wedding gift. A mother-in-law has even less legal standing than that. Legally, Renee said, this is nothing. Don't pay her a cent, don't even dignify it with a response. I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time since the envelope arrived. And then she said the thing that pulled it tight again. But hear me on this, she said. Legally, it's nothing. Socially, she just handed everyone in that town a story. And stories don't care what the law says. I sat down slowly, because she was right, and I'd already felt it in that grocery store parking lot. Doreen wasn't trying to win in a courtroom. She knew she couldn't. She was trying to win in the pews, and the produce aisle, and every parking lot in town, in all the places where the law never shows up, but everyone keeps score anyway. A judge would throw her invoice out in 10 minutes flat. But no judge on earth could stop Paige's whispers, or make those women at the grocery store meet my eyes again. The debt wasn't real. The verdict was. And I understood, hanging up that phone, that if I wanted my name back, I couldn't fight Doreen where she was weak. I'd have to answer her exactly where she believed she was strongest. 9 days later, a second letter arrived, dressed up a little nicer than the first. This one wore a costume. Where the invoice had been pure Doreen, this letter was typed on heavy paper, full of phrases like outstanding obligation and good faith resolution. It was signed by a cousin of hers who worked the front desk at a law office 2 counties over and had spent his whole life wanting people to believe he was an attorney. The letter threatened small claims court. It suggested, in an oily, helpful tone, that the matter could instead be settled through community mediation, at the church. I read it twice, and my stomach dropped, not because it frightened me legally, but because I finally saw the whole shape of the plan. Doreen wasn't going to sue me. That letter was theater. A prop, designed to make her invoice look official enough that reasonable people would assume there had to be something to it. And the mention of the church wasn't an accident. That was the real venue. They were going to pull the entire congregation into this, wrap a shakedown in the language of family and faith, and count on me being too proud, or too tired, to show up and defend myself. It was clever. I'll give Doreen that much. She had found the one arena where her weakness didn't matter at all, and mine did. A place where a grieving widow with a grievance beats an ex-daughter-in-law with a deed, every single time. Paige did the part her mother was too proud to do herself. She took it public. Not loudly. Not in a way you could point to directly. In the small, poisoned way a small town understands perfectly. She posted in the community group, the same one the whole church used to organize potlucks and prayer chains. Praying for our family through a hard season. Some people take and never think about what they owe. Heartbreaking to watch. No names. She didn't need any. By that evening, 3 people had texted me some version of "Is everything okay?" One older woman I barely knew messaged to say she was so sorry for what I was going through, in a tone that made it painfully clear which side of the story she'd already believed. I sat on my couch and felt the old heat climb up my neck. The urge to defend myself. To type out the whole truth in one long, furious post and hit send. I actually started writing it. Paragraph after paragraph. Every dollar. Every year. Every quiet check I'd written for people now calling me a thief. My thumb hovered over the button. And then I stopped. Because I heard my own voice in my head, the one that had kept me steady my whole life. I don't argue with numbers, people. I show them the numbers. Paige wanted a fight in the comments. A public mud match where the loudest, most wounded-sounding voice wins. That was her weapon. And her mother's. It had never once been mine. I deleted every word. I closed the app. And I opened the bottom drawer of my desk for the first time in years. I took out the green folder. I want to tell you about the choice I made that night, because it's the entire hinge of this story. I could have fought Doreen with her own weapon. I could have matched her whisper for whisper, post for post, and turned the whole town into an audience for a screaming match between 2 women neither side would ever fully trust again. That's exactly what she expected. That's what the entire trap had been built for. But I've learned something simple about conflict over the years. You don't beat someone by picking up their weapon. You beat them by using your own. Doreen's weapon was noise. Shame. The fog of a story with nothing solid behind it. Mine was the opposite, and it always had been. Documentation. Cold. Dated. Undeniable. So I sat there with the green folder in my lap, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to defend myself. Defending yourself sounds guilty. I was going to account for myself. Which sounds like nothing, until you see it done properly. I called Marcus Feld, an accountant I'd traded favors with for years, a man as allergic to exaggeration as I am. I need a formal, itemized statement, I told him. Everything I ever paid on behalf of that family. Every date. Every amount. Every cleared check. Sourced and totaled, on letterhead. There was a pause. Claire, I have to ask why. Because someone sent me a bill, Marcus. I'm just going to make sure the account is complete. He said he'd have it within a few days. I hung up and looked down at that folder. Thick with 7 years, I had never once let myself add up. I still didn't know the total. I was about to find out. Opening that folder properly was harder than I expected. It's a strange, quiet kind of grief, sitting down and finally counting what your own kindness cost you. I spread everything across my dining table under the good lamp, the same way I would a client's showbox of receipts. Bank statements with lines highlighted in yellow. Transfer confirmations. Photocopies of cleared checks, front and back. My own handwriting on sticky notes, dates and amounts in a shorthand only I could read. I sorted it all into stacks by year, then by person. My hands moved on their own the way they do when the work is familiar, even when the feeling underneath it isn't. Truck. Lawyer. Roof. Taxes. Food truck. Tuition. Funeral. Each stack a small monument to a season I had decided love simply meant covering the difference. Near the bottom of the folder, I found something I had genuinely forgotten was there. A single page, older and softer than the rest, tucked flat against the back. My hand stopped moving. It was an old receipt from the local feed store, 5 years old, worn soft at the folds. On the front, an ordinary list of fence supplies. On the back, in blue ink gone almost pale, a single line in Walter's handwriting, Doreen's late husband. Keep your receipts, Claire. Kindness and proof were never enemies. I remembered the afternoon he wrote it, though I hadn't understood it at the time. He'd asked me to help sort the farm's books because his eyes were failing and Doreen guarded the ledger too jealously to organize it herself. We'd spent an afternoon at his kitchen table making the columns finally line up. When we finished, he looked at me for a long moment, this quiet old man who noticed more than he ever said, and scribbled that line on the nearest scrap of paper, pressing it gently into my hand. I'd thought it was just farmer's advice about taxes. Sitting on my dining room floor 5 years later, I finally understood what he'd actually been telling me. He knew his wife. He knew the way she kept score, the way she could quietly rewrite a gift into a debt whenever it served her. And in the only way a man like Walter knew how, he was warning me, gently, that one day I would need to prove I had been good, because being good would not be enough on its own. I laid his receipt beside the 7 stacks, and for the first time, I let myself add it all up. Truck loan, $17,600. Lawyer and fines, $9,200. The roof, $14,500. Back taxes, $11,300. The food truck, $16,000. Page's tuition, $7,600. Walter's funeral, which I had quietly paid for myself, $6,800. I ran the numbers twice to be certain. Then I sat in the lamplight and looked at a total I had spent 7 years refusing to see. Marcus called 2 days later, and his voice had a careful flatness to it, the sound of a numbers person about to deliver a number that means far more than it says. I ran it 3 times, Claire. Cross-referenced every check against the statements, all sources verified. He read me the total. I already knew it. I'd run the same tape myself, alone on my dining room floor, but hearing it in his steady voice made it real in a way my own math hadn't managed. $83,000. I sat with the phone against my ear and did the one piece of arithmetic that actually mattered. Doreen had billed me for $78,000 over 7 years, without ever once asking, without a single word about it at the time. I had already paid that family $83,000. I hadn't just covered her invoice. I had overpaid it by $5,000, years before she ever wrote a word of it down. There's a particular kind of silence that lives inside a fact like that. Not triumph. I didn't feel like celebrating. It was closer to vertigo. The floor of the entire story tilting beneath me. Everything I had been called, quietly reversed by a single line of arithmetic. She cleaned the family out. That's what the town believed. And the truth, sourced, dated, and sitting right there in a folder on my desk, was the exact opposite. I was the reason that family still had a farm. The invitation came through Ethan, which felt like its own small cowardice. A text from a man too soft to make a phone call. Mom's doing the farm's 40th anniversary dinner at the church hall Saturday. Whole family, a lot of the congregation. She thinks it would be good if you came, so we could settle things like adults. I read it 3 times, and each time I understood the plan a little better. Doreen wasn't inviting me to make peace. She was building a courtroom and calling it a celebration. 40 years of the family farm. The widow who had held it all together. The whole congregation gathered to honor her. And somewhere in the middle of it, the ungrateful ex-daughter-in-law who supposedly owed the family $78,000. She would stand up, sorrowful and gentle, raise the debt in front of everyone, and count on the crowd, and the candlelight, and my own pride to do the rest of the work for her. Either I wouldn't show up, and my absence would confirm the story. Or I would show up and crumble, and my crumbling would confirm it too. She had designed a room with no exit for me. That was her mistake. Because Doreen had spent so long thinking about the stage she was building, she never once stopped to ask what I might choose to bring onto it. She wanted an audience. So did I. For the first time in months, our interests lined up perfectly. I texted Ethan back one calm, short line. Tell your mother I'll be there. Then I looked at 2 clean copies of Marcus's statement sitting in their envelopes on my desk, next to a single page Renee had written for me. If you're watching this and thinking about just paying quietly to keep the peace, I understand that pull more than you know. There's a difference between keeping the peace and letting someone rewrite your entire life. I lived on the wrong side of that line for 7 years. If you've ever been billed for your own kindness, type receipts in the comments. You are not alone. The church hall was done up the way that church always did everything, warm, and a little worn around the edges. Long folding tables under yellow light. The smell of church coffee and roast chicken thick in the air. A banner over the small stage read celebrating 40 years of the Whitfield family farm. Doreen had spared no effort. She sat at the head of the longest table like a woman holding court. When I walked in, I watched the news of my arrival travel across the room in a slow wave, heads turning, conversations dipping, that particular hush of a room full of people pretending they hadn't been waiting for exactly this. Paige gave me a small, tight smile. The smile of someone who already believes she's won. Ethan stood near his mother and looked away the moment our eyes met, almost a flinch. I found a seat near the middle of the room. Not hiding in the back. Not charging the front. I set my small stack of envelopes on the table, folded my hands, and waited. Picture the whole room in that moment, because Doreen had staged it perfectly. Every face arranged to watch a grieving widow gently ask a thief to finally do the right thing. They were all so certain of the performance they were about to witness. I sat calm as still water in the middle of it, and I felt something I hadn't felt since that certified envelope first landed on my counter. I felt steady. Because for the first time, I knew something the entire room didn't. Doreen rose, tapped her water glass with a spoon. And the hall went quiet the way it always did for her, out of respect, and a little bit of fear. She spoke about Walter. About 40 years of dawn and drought and holding on through everything. She was good at this. Her voice caught in all the right places. Then she turned, slow and sorrowful, until she was looking directly at me, and the whole hall turned with her. I didn't want to do this here, she said, pitched to Carrie. But this family has always believed in handling things honestly, in front of the people who matter. Claire, you know why the Lord put this on my heart tonight. I paid for your wedding. $78,000, out of a widow's savings, because I believed in you. And when you left my son, you left that debt behind you like it meant nothing. She let it hang there. A few chairs shifted. Someone behind me murmured softly. I have prayed on it, she went on. And I keep coming back to the same simple truth. Family always pays what it owes. That was her line. The one from the bottom of the invoice, now spoken aloud in front of the entire congregation, dressed up as faith and grief and a widow's wounded love. Half the room was already nodding. She folded her hands and looked at me with something almost like tenderness, the cruelest part of all. So I'll ask you, in front of everyone, when are you going to make it right? And every face in that hall turned to watch me fall apart. I stood up slowly. Not fast, not defensive. Just a woman getting to her feet in a quiet room. I could feel every eye on me, waiting for tears, waiting for the guilty flush, waiting for the ugly outburst that would prove Doreen right. I gave them none of it. Thank you, Doreen, I said, and my voice came out even and clear. You're right about one thing. In fact, you're right about the most important thing. I paused, and let the room hold its breath, because I could feel her bracing for a fight she was already sure she'd win. Family always pays what it owes, I said. I believe that too. I've always believed that. Something flickered across her face. The first crack. She had expected denial. Excuses. A woman shrinking. Instead, I had agreed with her. An agreement was the one move she hadn't prepared for. I reached down and picked up the first envelope, holding it lightly, unhurried, the way you hold something you're certain of. You paid for my wedding, I said. And I won't stand here and pretend you didn't. That was real, and it was generous, and I've never once forgotten it. A few people relaxed. They thought this was the surrender. But before I open this, I said, looking slowly around the room, let's make sure everyone here gets to hear both sides of a ledger. Because a debt is a two-way document. And I've kept my copy. I opened the envelope, but not for the statement yet. I took out Renee's single page and held it up so the room could see the real letterhead. I'm not going to bore you with legal language, I said, because I didn't come here to hide behind it. But since there's been an invoice going around, and a letter from a paralegal threatening court, I think you all deserve to hear what my attorney has to say about it. I read it plainly. That money earned during a marriage belongs to both spouses. That there is no legal basis whatsoever for one family member to bill another for a wedding gift years after the fact. That the invoice sitting in Doreen's hands would be dismissed in any courtroom in this state within 10 minutes. I lowered the page. Across the room, I watched faces shift. Doreen's cousin suddenly found something fascinating about his own shoes. Two older men who had been nodding along glanced at each other the way people do when they realize they've been cheering for the wrong side. I want to be clear with all of you, I said. I didn't come here to win a legal argument. I could have thrown that invoice in the trash and never thought about it again. Doreen keeps talking about a debt, about setting things right, about what family owes. So let's actually do that. Let's settle the account. All of it. I reached into the second envelope and pulled out Marcus's statement. The room went still. I told you I keep books for a living, I said. So when Doreen sent me a bill, I did what I always do. I made sure the account was complete. Here is everything I paid this family over 7 years. Every dollar sourced. Every check cleared. Prepared and signed by a licensed accountant. I began. The truck loan, when it went underwater, $17,600. I let it land, then continued. The lawyer and fines, after the DUI, $9,200. I heard the first sharp intake of breath somewhere to my left. The roof, the winter it failed, $14,500. That one turned heads. Half the room had sat under that roof. The back taxes he'd hidden, $11,300. The food truck, $16,000. With each number, another face in the room quietly fell. Paige's tuition, I said, and I looked directly at her. At the community college. $7,600. Paige went white. Her mouth opened, and nothing came out. She was the one who had written "Some people take and take." Now the whole room knew exactly who had paid for her degree. One line was left. When Walter died, I said, and my voice stayed level even though his name still cost me something, this family didn't have the money to bury him. I know that, because I'm the one who quietly paid for it. His funeral. $6,800. Somewhere in the room, a woman pressed her hand over her mouth. Doreen made a small, broken sound, the sound of someone who had let herself forget the one line on the page that could never be argued with. I gave the room a moment. Then I closed it, the only way a bookkeeper knows how. So let's add it up. The way Doreen wants. Truck. Lawyer. Roof. Taxes. Food truck. Tuition. Funeral. $83,000. That's what I paid this family, without ever once sending a bill. I let the number sit in the air. Doreen, you billed me for $78,000. Years before you ever wrote that invoice, I had already paid $83,000. So by your own math, the one you keep preaching, this family doesn't owe me an apology. It owes me $5,000. The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. Doreen's hand slapped the table. How dare you?
This is private.
This is family business. But the room wasn't with her anymore, and she could feel it draining away with every second. You're going to believe her? A woman who abandoned my son. Her voice climbed, cracked. That's what her kind does.
Her kind.
The words hung in the air, ugly, and I watched two families' worth of neighbors quietly decide they'd heard more than enough. Then, into the middle of his mother's unraveling, Ethan finally spoke. "Mom," he said, barely above a whisper. "Mom, stop." He stood, wouldn't quite look at her, wouldn't quite look at me either.
She's right. It's all true. Every dollar.
Claire paid for all of it.
The room heard him.
Doreen heard him. And it hit her harder than anything I had said all night. Her own son, confirming the account in front of everyone she'd gathered.
I didn't raise my voice. That's the part I'm proudest of.
I folded Marcus's statement slowly, neatly, walked the few steps to the head of the table, and set it down gently beside her untouched plate. "You can keep the invoice, Doreen," I said, quiet enough that the whole hall had to still itself to hear me.
"Consider it paid, with interest. I never once charged you for any of it. Family always pays what it owes."
"I heard you the first time, and the second, and every time since.
So I paid mine.
Years before you asked. I'm not here for the 5,000.
I never wanted any of it back.
I only wanted this town to stop believing I stole from you, when the truth is, I'm the reason you still have a roof, and a farm, and a daughter with a diploma." For one long moment, she simply stared at the statement like it was something alive. Then she cracked completely.
"Get out. Get out of my family's hall."
Her voice broke clean in half on the last word.
I turned to leave. I didn't need to say anything else. Mine had already been said.
Walking toward the doors, I felt the room shift completely, the small way a town shows its hand. An older woman near the aisle stood quietly and held my coat out for me before I even reached the rack, the way you'd help a friend, not a stranger.
It meant everything.
A few of the men nodded to me, grave and respectful.
A woman touched my arm on the way past.
"God bless you, honey," she said, and there was no doubt left in her voice at all.
Nobody looked at Doreen.
That was the loudest verdict of the entire night. I drove home through the dark, past sleeping fields and shuttered storefronts, back to my little house on Larkspur Lane with my own name on the deed. The green folder sat on the passenger seat beside me, Walter's soft old receipt tucked back inside it. Kindness and proof were never enemies.
He had known.
He'd tried to tell me at his own kitchen table, years before I understood I would ever need to hear it, that being good would never be enough on its own. That someday, someone I trusted would try to rewrite my generosity into a crime, and the only thing that could save me was the quiet habit I'd once been almost ashamed of. 2 days later, the certified letters stopped completely. No apology. No reply. No final threat. Just silence. It was, I realized, the first honest thing that family had sent me in years. A week later, an envelope arrived from Ethan. Inside was a check for $5,000, written in his familiar, uneven handwriting.
No note attached. I never cashed it.
I put it in a small frame instead, right next to Walter's old feed store receipt, and hung both of them above my desk. The debt, and the proof, the kindness, and the record. And underneath them, in the bottom drawer, the green folder finally rests, closed, and settled. Here's what 7 years and one loud night in a church hall taught me, and it's the only piece of advice I have left to give you. Kindness doesn't have to stand alone. And self-respect was never meant to be a bill. But the day you stop keeping proof of your own worth is the day you hand somebody else the pen, and let them write your total for you. By the way, where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments, because it's genuinely amazing to see how far these stories travel around the world. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear that receipts and love were never enemies. And don't forget to subscribe to Calm Drama Stories.
Keep your receipts. I'll see you in the next one.